in the immediate vicinity of the concentration camp. So the Americans, once the Americans took over, frequent new reinforcements of Americans began to come in to take charge, and regular flights from Okinawa and Tinian were flown in with food, clothing, medicine, dropped by parachute for the prisoners in the concentration camp. We kids liked the stuff like chewing gum. We'd take a few bites and then pass it to the next kid to take a few bites. The next kid and take a few bites because we didn't know if we'd ever see it again, you know, and you never threw it away. You kept it in your mouth and added another piece till your jaw hurt from eating so many pieces at one time.
The reason why I raised that question, because when the war ended, I was on the LST. We had the 1st Marine Division, 150 on our ship. And we went on a week talk, they said the Japanese prisoners in Japan, and then we went to Japan to Tientsin, China, because there was a garrison there, and even though the war was over, they refused to surrender to the Chinese because the Chinese were killed. They'd been there 25 years.
Yeah.
So we went in, our 4 ships went in there, and we took them, guided them, they dropped their arms, and we took them aboard our ship, and means, you know, took them back because they knew they would survive if they had their arms down.
You know, I can tell you that our particular team was fortunate in that it was not faced with Japanese hostility, because at least one of these rescue teams, there were quite a number of them were sent, there were a number of these concentration camps dotted around Asia, Taiwan, Vietnam, Manchuria, China itself, and at least one, they came within an inch of their life of being executed by the Japanese, even though they said they were there as a humanitarian mission. Marty.
First of all, it's nice meeting you after all these years.
See, we've been going steady for years on the internet, because Marty has been a marvelous, marvelous helper in trying to help me track down who was the crew of the Armored Angel that liberated the camp. And Marty, through his connections with, it's the
14th Air Force.
Yeah, and to see whether or not anybody would know anything about that plane or who was in the plane, because we never found those people. So we've been back and forth for a long time.
There's one piece of story that I can add. The reason that it was so urgent to rescue the people in the camps, as well as General Wainwright, who was up in a camp in Manchuria, is that before the Japanese knew they were losing the war, they threatened to execute all prisoners in all camps. And that's one of the reasons why I believe it was the 14th Air Force.
I can't remember, but that may be the one.
Yeah, they were the 14th. The biggest of Air Force in China was the 14th Air Force. I'm all positive it was the 14th Air Force.
But they put these seven-man rescue teams together at the last minute when they got this information that the Japanese, the intelligence indicated that the Japanese were intending to execute their prisoners or use them for prisoner exchanges. And that was why they were rushed out like almost the day after the Japanese emperor had officially capitulated.
Have you ever been back to the camp at Weishan?
Yes, I've been back more than once. In fact, the astonishing thing was in 2005, which was the 60th anniversary of our liberation from the camp, the city is now called Weifang rather than Weishan, but it's the same place, officially invited former prisoners from around the world to go back, and we were able to use the internet to get in touch with people, and we were treated like royalty. They put us up in a hotel and put on an amazing program for us. It was really spotlighted by media around the world when we were invited back there to the concentration camp. There's not a lot left of what we knew. It's now been turned, much of the area has been turned into a a middle school or high school, but the old hospital, which was one of the places we small children stayed, was still there. We were able to actually go into the rooms where we had been, where we had slept and stayed during the war, actually. So we've been back a few times, but let me tell you what they did. I mean, we were trucked into that place like we were cattle in trucks. The British called them lorries. We were trucked in lorries like animals. And this time when we were brought in, they had bands. In 2005 for our 60th return, they had bands, they had banners. They started out, the exact moment that the American parachutes dropped, they said exactly at this moment, 60 years ago, the Americans came, and then they dropped they dropped tiny parachutes from firecrackers down all on top of us. And at the end of the ceremony, they liberated 1,500 doves. I think they were pigeons, but they called them doves. To symbolize the liberation of 1,500 prisoners on that day 60 years ago. So yes, we have been back, and we keep in touch with officials in the what used to be the concentration camp.
Did the Japanese abuse you during control?
We were blessed. We were. The question was, were we abused by the Japanese? The Japanese, we did not have anything in the form of what would be considered a death camp. There were people that were locked up, put up in a lockup if they were caught doing like black markets or something like that. But there was nothing in the way of like what you read about in the extermination camps in the Philippines and in we'll say in Europe. So we were not abused in that way. I mean, it was crowded. There was crowding. There was hunger. There was cold. There was there was all the emotional terror of being in such a place, knowing what could happen. Grown-ups knew that. I never thought of that.
What was the percentage that survived?
Most people survived. It was interesting. There were about as many people born in the camp as there were who died in the camp. So people kept making babies.
Were the Army parachutists?
They were all but one members of the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS.
The reason I'm asking, 11th Airborne was in the Pacific.
Okay, well they were all...
And they're called the Angels.
Well, these were not the airborne. These were people from the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. One was not. He was in something called the AGAS, the Air Ground Assistance Service. But all of the others were in the Office of Strategic Services.
How'd you make out with your family at the end of the war?
Well, now see, if you'd have to be here about another hour for me to tell you about how we got home, because that was an amazing trip right then and there.
That was a day of celebration.
It most certainly was, and we had not seen our parents for 5.5 years, and when we arrived home on September 9/11, 1945, we had a little brother there waiting for us, almost 5 years old, that we had never seen.
Was the father and mother?
Father and mother, they had escaped in front of advancing Japanese armies to the far northwest of China, had gone through terrible things, bombings, because the Japanese were trying to soften up that section of China in order to take over that section. So my parents went through horrendous bombings and things of that kind where they had escaped ahead of us.
In the camp itself, did the children have some type of service, religious service?
Our teachers tried to continue all of the same kind of, learning the Bible as we had. I mean, we were in a Christian school when we were captured, and the teachers wanted to continue all of the things the same as much as they could have the same. Salvation Army and others. It was a very interesting way that they all, various denominations, there were many Catholic priests and nuns in this concentration camp, and they continued Catholic services. There was as I told you, it used to be a Presbyterian missionary compound, so there was a church there. Everybody worked out some kind of a system of sharing the use of the church. So there were religious services that went on in the concentration camp.
Thank you.
You've been a very, very good audience to talk to. Thank you so much.
Harry, one question. Here, right here. Has there been any thought or offer to possibly make a documentary or a movie about that experience that you went through?
There is a producer right now. This is the producer that produced about 3 or 4 years ago the story of it's called Amazing Grace. That was the story of the English legislator who stopped slavery in England. That was the movie. The producer of that is working on a sequel about Eric Liddell and the concentration camp. Now, whether they'll get the money for it, I don't know, but I know they've met with me for about most of the day about a year ago and have someone working on a script. But I don't know if, again, will money come forth to fund it?
My name is Bill Pranzato. Pearl Harbor Day. I remember I was at my grandmother's house listening to the radio between the Eagles and the Redskins.
Oh, this is amazing.
It was an afternoon.
Did the Eagles win?
I don't remember.
Oh.
I think they did.
All the things you remember, you don't even remember the score.
Of course they won.
Anyone else?
Mary, who were your teachers exactly, and how old were they? You say teachers, were they missionaries?
They were missionaries. They were missionary teachers that were dedicated to teaching, and it was like an elementary and the high school equivalency. Well, the teacher I told you that we were interviewed by the BBC a couple of weeks ago on a program. Our Browning troop leader is alive and well at the age of 94 in Seattle, Washington. And they interviewed her, Miss Davy. By the way, she got married in the camp. There were a few people that got married in the camp. Can you imagine that? Isn't that something else?
Were you born here?
I was born in China. All of my brothers and my siblings were born in China.
I was wondering if you knew semaphore code is.
No, and nor my Morse code either. Shame, shame. After all these years, it should still be on the